This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for November 15th, 2016, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Q-Woods?
Christina Roach.
Hello.
And producer Pat.
Hi, everyone.
We have a great show for you, as usual. Pat is going to look into whether a dead gorilla got 15,000 votes. Adam is going to look into moving to Canada.
That's right.
For others, not him. Although he is in Quebec, so you never know.
I'm going to move to English Canada.
And finally, Christina is going to investigate Trump predictions. As you're well aware, listeners, Donald J. Trump has been elected President of the United States. People have flooded the internet and social spaces with explanations about why this has happened. Please push back on anyone that says Trump was elected for only one reason. It was because this particular group of voters turned out. It's because this particular group of voters didn't. X, Y, Z, and so on. This is called the single cause fallacy, and I covered it on episode 205. It's simply the idea that something happens because of only one reason, one cause. This makes pretty much no sense in almost anything that's happened in the world. We're in a causal web. Things are connected. That's why I jokingly said for this election, instead of third-party voters, instead of the Democrats, instead of Bernie not being the opponent, I blame the Big Bang on causality. That's kind of how it goes.
Blame, strong word.
Exactly. Now, that said, it is hard not to feel that critical thinking and evidence-based reasoning was dealt a huge blow. And indeed, I think it has, especially when we think of what's going to happen going forward and the impact of a Trump presidency. That said, it's not like the U.S. as a country, in terms of all the thoughts and feelings that the American people have, is fundamentally different in the past few days compared to the past few weeks, the past few months, perhaps even the past few years. It's this idea that because a little difference in an outcome happened, because the votes were so close, there's a huge difference in narrative of what the country is and what it means. If you can separate what the country is and what it means compared to the impact, I think that makes some sense. Donald Trump's victory provides us with clear evidence that we have to fight for the ideas of reason and evidence-based thinking with vigilance, determination, and kindness. And sometimes kindness means fighting very strongly for ideas you believe in to make sure other people don't lose their rights. And other times it's listening to someone with whom you completely disagree using patience.
Bit of a side idea here. If people were surprised that there were only 2 segments last week, that was because we recorded 3. The third segment was about what Bill Clinton would be called as the first lady or first gentleman after Hillary Clinton won the election. That didn't go as expected, and the segment was so kind of silly and lighthearted, and after Trump won, we just didn't feel it was appropriate. So we just scrapped it, and I think the show was salvaged pretty well. Thank you, always, Producer Pat.
Thanks, Pat.
So, hey, guys, did you hear that Donald Trump won the U.S. election last week? So, a lot of people who are unhappy about this have put the blame, as Darren just mentioned, on a single cause, and that is third-party voters. Many Democrats pointed to the 2000 election where Green Party candidate Ralph Nader received nearly 100,000 votes in Florida and arguably swung the election to George W. Bush. In this most recent election, Gary Johnson got just over 3% of the national vote and Jill Stein got 1%. There's some decent analysis on whether or not third-party votes could have made a difference in this election result, particularly by the Wall Street Journal. It may be something that we can go back and cover on a future show, but one supposed write-in candidate had social media buzzing right after the election. Here are some quotes. "If you voted for Harambe, as a joke, I hope those 20 likes on Facebook were worth it. And 14,000 votes for Harambe, there is a 600 vote difference in New Hampshire. There is a 3,000 vote difference in Pennsylvania. Wasted votes. And 11,000 people voted for Harambe. Let me remind you that Harambe is a dead gorilla. Those 11,000 votes could have saved our country."
Oh, brother.
Okay, first off, just in case you missed it, Harambe was a 17-year-old gorilla at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden. On May 28th of this year, a 3-year-old boy climbed into the enclosure and was grabbed and dragged by the gorilla. A zoo worker shot and killed him out of fear for the boy's life. It was all caught on video, creating quite a bit of controversy, despite a number of experts weighing in that the zoo had no choice under the circumstances. This controversy has turned the silverback gorilla into something of a beloved figure for some, with hundreds of online memes dedicated to the animal's memory. The rumors about write-in votes for Harambe seem to have started on Twitter and Facebook the very night of the election. A report on the Daily Snark seemed to have lent some credibility. From the article, quote, "By around 1 a.m., the dead gorilla racked up more than 15,000 write-in votes for the presidency." Interestingly, although that story and headline indicate 15,000 votes, people familiar with content management systems like WordPress know that the URL of a post is often formed based on the original title. I noticed that the URL indicated 11,000 votes, so I can only assume that 15,000 was more clickbaity than 11,000, so they changed the title.
These guys don't know that you can actually go through in a WordPress post and change the slug so that it actually redirects all links to the 15,000. But
Right.
anything that's already linked from social media may still have that original link. But this is something I see a lot where someone posts an article and there's a Facebook headline and I click on it and then the article's got a way less clickbaity headline that's more accurate. And I'm like, oh, I was going to get angry and they just changed it.
So I should mention that the Daily Snark is a satirical site, but the story got picked up by a bunch of legitimate sites, including NBC Miami, without much fact-checking.
Wow.
Just for context, write-in votes accounted for 0.11% of the vote in 2012. So, did a dead gorilla really get a bunch of these write-in votes? It does seem like some people actually wrote in Harambe's name, took pictures of their ballots, and posted them to social media. But the claim that any specific number of votes were cast for the gorilla is simply untrue. On November 8th, when these reports started, the general election votes were still being counted, and a running vote tally was not available for write-in candidates. In fact, in the vast majority of states, votes for Harambe would never, ever be tallied separately. It's likely these so-called protest votes would either be considered spoiled votes and not be counted at all, or would be lumped together with popular write-in votes for Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, the Flying Spaghetti Monster, and anybody but such and such in a single category such as other or unofficial vote. This is because in at least 34 states, write-in ballot hopefuls must fill out paperwork before the election in order to ensure that their ballots are tallied. In several other states, write-in votes are simply not allowed. The remaining states don't require presidential write-in candidates to file special paperwork before the election, but according to a PBS article about write-in votes, in many states, unless the total number of write-in votes equals or exceeds the largest number of votes cast for a candidate printed on the ballot, they aren't counted separately. So in short, number one, these reports came out well before write-in votes would have been tallied. In fact, election officials have until November 18th, that's 3 days from the day that we're taping this show, to tally votes for write-in candidates, and those are the ones who actually registered to be counted. And number two, even though some people did seem to have written in Harambe's name, it's unlikely that a deceased gorilla filed the appropriate paperwork to have those votes tallied separately in the vast majority of states, and that they would have been considered spoiled votes in many other states and not counted at all. Lastly, it may be worth pointing out that Harambe would be constitutionally ineligible as a candidate since you have to be 35 years of age.
Let's appreciate Pat's logical rigor where he said it's not likely that Harambe filled out the paperwork, which is true. Given the recent U.S. election, many residents are thinking, what if I move to Canada, the land of maple syrup and honey? Adam, what does it entail moving to the great white Canada North?
Great question, Darren. Last week, something terrible happened, and as a result, as we see every 4 years or so, Americans have been threatening to move to Canada. A listener, Joe, wrote us an email asking about the differences between the US and Canada as far as many social and political issues go. Well, this would make for a very interesting segment or series of segments for a whole show, which we would like to tackle in the future. But partially inspired by that, I wondered just how realistic the idea of moving to Canada really was. Can a disgruntled American just move to Canada? What's involved? Would they even be established here by the time the next president is elected? A lot of people wondered this as Google searches for moving to Canada soared last week, and the Citizenship and Immigration Canada site was unavailable due to heavy traffic. Now, some of these cases are very simple. Actress Neve Campbell was born in Ontario and threatened to move back to Canada if Donald Trump was elected. This would not be terribly difficult for her. She can just do it. But what about the rest of you? Well, first, we have some good news. Donald Trump has not vowed to build a wall on the US-Canada border. Similarly, the Canadian government has not decided to follow Trump's lead and build a wall of maple syrup and hockey sticks along the 49th parallel. The border, including that between us and Alaska, is 8,891 kilometers long. And if you want to know what that is in miles, you're in for a culture shock. So these will just be loose ideas, so if you're interested in really moving to Canada, you should check out the Citizenship and Immigration Canada website to know exactly what you have to do. Now, moving to Canada isn't something that everyone is able to do. Many people joke about Canada being the 51st state, but this is kind of nonsense, and I think people actually know that. There are criteria for immigrants, and the US does not have any special rules which make it easier to move to Canada, so these things that I will outline will generally apply to all of our listeners, except those who are already in Canada. Of course, you don't have to do any of this work. People are welcome to try before you buy, as they say. You can stay in Canada up to 120 days to see if you like it here. You probably will. Depends when you come. You can't work here, though. If you're just visiting, you just kind of travel and get a feel for the place. But you will need a valid passport or Nexus card to get in. The first time I visited the States, I did so with my birth certificate, but 9/11 changed all that, and there's been some more restrictions in place since then. Before we get into how you can be eligible, let's look at a few ways in which you may not be allowed to immigrate. So, if you've got one of these things, don't even try. If you have committed a human or international rights violation, chances are out the window. If you have a criminal record, you may not be able to get in. If you have certain health issues, that could be a restriction. If you are somehow misrepresenting yourself, that can be a problem. You can also be denied for financial reasons. And if you don't comply with the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, or have a family member who is otherwise inadmissible, you just won't be able to get in. Now, generally, we're not talking about citizenship when we talk about moving to Canada. More realistically, what we're talking about is permanent Canadian residency. Now, there are a few types, and you'll need to fit into one of these classes to be able to come in. One that many people may fit into is the skilled workers and professional class. Basically, you need a professional skill which is in demand in Canada. And there is an express entry profile which can be created for foreign workers in this class. You'll generally need at least a year of experience. Your age, experience, education, and field will be considered. Some jobs are more in demand than others. There's basically a skilled worker selection grid, which has points awarded for various criteria. There's also a job bank where you can try to be matched up with a potential job. Now, a good start to go through this is to have a job offer for permanent full-time work, but there are caveats. The employer may need a labor market impact assessment. Basically, this shows that there's a need for a foreign worker to fill the job, and it needs to show that no Canadian worker is available to do that same job. So if you have a skill which is possessed by a lot of unemployed people in Canada who are trying to get work, well, you might have a big problem getting a job offer. Self-employed people who make over $40,000 a year can prove that they could continue to make that money in Canada, and then they can come over as self-employed. If you're really rich, the business, startup, or investor class might be for you. You need at least $10 million to fall into this category. So perhaps Donald Trump will find the requirements of a real job are much too much for him and will move to Canada.
Now, is that 10 million Canadian?
10 million Canadian. All the dollars I give are in Canadian. And
so it's only 7-8 million American. You guys, come on up.
There's also the caregiver visas, which are available to those planning to give care to a Canadian resident or citizen. Some people use this to bring someone in to be their, like a nanny or anything like that. There are also provincial classes, which are have province-specific rules. So Quebec specifically has the Quebec Selected class, and if you're looking to specifically move to Quebec, look into those specifics. They have similar criteria to other classes. Quebec is pretty French, although I do know some Anglophones who get by in the province. It would be wise to consider moving here only if you know how to speak French. Now, if you have family in Canada, you can get sponsored by a family member already living here.
That's what happened to me.
What happened to you? You had a family member already here?
We had a family member that sponsored my parents and I to come to Canada. And we had to go to the city that he lived in, and we stayed there for a little bit and then moved to Quebec.
So at first you had to live in the same city that the family member who sponsored you lived in.
Sarnia, yeah.
I'm glad that worked out for you. And so are our listeners.
Yeah.
So this is why marrying a Canadian could potentially help, and all that will really help is that if you marry a Canadian, then that Canadian is a family member, and that family member can then sponsor you. You don't automatically just get in because of that. There's also international adoption, which allows Canadian parents to adopt a baby or child from another country. This likely will not apply to any of our listeners. If it does, how are you even following this podcast? I'm very impressed. If you are fleeing your country for safety reasons, you can come to Canada as a refugee. Saying that Trump is terrible will probably not be enough to get you in Canada as a refugee. He has said some terrible things, but I imagine things would need to deteriorate significantly before this kind of excuse can be used. There are people fleeing from war-torn countries who need to come in as refugees right now, and it's not a good idea to sort of take those legitimate reasons away from these people. If you are a student, enrolling in a Canadian university is a way to move to Canada, but this is only temporary. You'll need to find employment in order to extend your visa after graduation. But, you can go and dump a bunch of money into a school here. Of course, a lot of our universities are partially funded for people who live here, so you'll pay a lot more than someone who already lives in Canada to come to school here. So the next thing that you'll have to deal with is a bunch of paperwork, and a language test may be needed. Some forms are online. Others may need to be mailed in on paper. It's old school, but that's the way the government works sometimes. And it can cost a bunch of money. If you're looking to come in as a professional, it costs $550 Canadian for an individual, but prices go up to $1,250 for a family. So you can get a lawyer to help you sort of navigate the process, but then you can be paying significantly more, and having a lawyer isn't going to necessarily reduce any of the wait times. And it just might help you get an edge on working on some of that paperwork. Now, the wait can be quite long. Entry for a skilled worker can take 6 to 12 months just to get a response. Live-in caregivers may need to wait about 51 months. That's over 4 years.
Wow.
And self-employed people can wait 95 months, nearly 8 years, and enough time for Trump to have served 2 full terms. Even having a spouse sponsor you can take 14 months. So, all that can happen in this time, and it's going to be a big portion of the Trump presidency that will have gone by while you're waiting to get in. You may also need health insurance. Have you heard of the great public health care up here? Well, not so fast. You will need private health insurance for up to 3 months. Refugees may be protected by the interim federal health program. The same can apply when you're moving from province to province. When I moved to Quebec, I wasn't immediately covered by Harambe. That's the plan in Quebec, but I was still covered by my OHIP in Ontario, so that was fine. Becoming a citizen is even harder, and you will very likely not be able to do that while Trump is still president. You'll have to have lived in Canada for 4 years, that being 4 out of the last 6 years. So unless Trump is around for a second term, it's completely out of the question. And during those 4 years, you need to have been in Canada for more than half of each one of those years, that being 183 days as a minimum out of every one of those 4 years. You have to be 18, and you must be able to speak English or French. So move to Canada if you want, but it won't be easy, it won't be quick, and it won't be cheap. Threatening to move to Canada, on the other hand, is as easy as retweeting something, #activism, or placing a safety pin on your shirt. The results will likely be about the same.
Threatening to move to Canada is as American as apple pie. Although I might take some issue with the safety pin comment, but that can be a different show. lot of people made a lot of predictions, especially about Trump. Isn't that right, Christina?
Well, we've all heard the term prediction used in various contexts, right? A prediction is defined as a statement about what will happen or might happen in the future. Note, it does not inherently imply anything mystical or magical. It's simply a forecast where one predicts or estimates a future occurrence after studying and analyzing available information. An example from Merriam-Webster's dictionary: the figures and statistics are used for the prediction of future economic trends. An educated guess, if you will. The word prediction is also used to describe something more akin to fortune telling, a prophecy that lies outside the sphere of science, marked by the implication that there's something extraordinary or a mysterious sensitivity or perception or understanding going on. Let's call those wild guesses. Slate magazine published an article post-election titled "A List of the Pundits, Psychics, and Animals Who Predicted Trump's Victory." The list runs the gamut. There are reasonable predictions like Alan Lichtman, a prof at the American University who uses historic and economic factors rather than polls, and so far he's correctly predicted 30 years of presidential outcomes. Then there's the ridiculous, like the Russian polar bear or the Chinese monkey, who are credited with somehow predicting Trump's win. But there are three particularly pervasive stories making the rounds right now on social media, and those are the ones that I wanted to address. First, I'm sure you guys have seen this one. There's a claim that The Simpsons not only eerily foresaw Donald Trump's presidential run, but that they also correctly predicted each state that he would win in the electoral vote. A graphic and video of a cartoon Simpsons Trump, purported to be from year 2000 episode, shows him descending an escalator in Trump Tower, waving to onlookers and standing behind a podium, juxtaposed to the identical image of real-life Trump doing that in 2015. So this prompted people to speculate at some supernatural prediction by the show's creators. This graphic has now been shared hundreds of thousands of times on Facebook and Twitter with comments like, "This is crazy," or "How creepy," etc. But as Snopes rightly points out, the images from The Simpsons showing Trump's candidacy announcement are from a 2015 clip called Trumpastic Voyage, not 2000. The show producers were reacting to and mocking the announcement that Trump had already made about seeking the Republican nomination. Ironically, though, The Simpsons did feature a joke in a 2000 episode titled Bart to the Future that foresaw what many did not ever imagine would happen. A 38-year-old Lisa Simpson becomes the first female POTUS succeeding Trump after he leaves the economy in ruin, using the line, "We've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump." As prophetic as some people claim, Trump had already been making public statements about flirting with the idea at a presidential run as far back as 1999. So again, this is The Simpsons merely reacting to him. By the way, in the recent post-election episode, The Simpsons quietly referred to its 2000 prediction when tweeting a clip of the show intro, and the tweet said, "The Simpsons updates its 2000 prediction of a Trump presidency." And the clip shows Bart writing "being right sucks" all over the chalkboard. So as for the theory that The Simpsons also predicted the electoral map, that's quite the stretch. An image of Mr. Burns and a dog kneeling in front of an electoral map is real, but it was taken from a 2012 clip where Burns, a greedy and mean-spirited billionaire, in case you've never watched the show.
I like how you explained that, but you didn't explain who Lisa was or Bart.
So in the clip, he's endorsing Republican candidate Mitt Romney. But that electoral map clearly shows differences, specifically Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania being blue, which were states that went red this past election. So honestly,
it's
guys,
just a general map of how the states often go in an election. With
exactly.
the belt in red and all that.
It's surprising to me how many people reposted a screenshot of the Simpsons electoral map against the one with the actual results from Trump's win, claiming how eerie or freaky it was. You're literally looking at them side by side, yet commenting how identical they are. But anyway.
Terrible.
At least when you dig into the Simpsons theory, you can kind of get how it got distorted and spread around. But the next prediction theory is more than a bit of a stretch. According to a viral image, the late Kurt Cobain, lead singer and guitarist of the band Nirvana, predicted in 1993 that someone like Donald Trump would one day be elected president. The quote attributed to Cobain actually first made the rounds in the summer, but it's resurfaced, as you guys can imagine, with a vengeance following Trump's win. And it's had tens of thousands of shares on Facebook, among other social networks. Here's the quote. In the end, I believe my generation will surprise everyone. We already know that both political parties are playing both sides from the middle and will elect a true outsider when we fully mature. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not a business tycoon who can't be bought and who does what's right for the people. Someone like Donald Trump, as crazy as that sounds. So our friends at Snopes.com first debunked this one when it popped up earlier this year. It seems the quote originated from a pro-Trump Facebook page called Trump Train, known for spreading misinformation. They posted the image of Cobain in July without any context of where Cobain allegedly made this prediction. For example, was it during an interview? Did he say it during a live performance? It just says he made the prediction at some point in '93. Well, no surprise, there's no record of him saying this anywhere, and Cobain was famously quoted a lot. The image even incorrectly spells his first name with a C instead of a K. Finally, you knew it was coming. Did Nostradamus predict Donald Trump's victory?
Someone actually mentioned this at work, not even prompted by anything, and I did some Googling, and let's see what you found, Christina.
Yeah. I can see a lot of listeners rolling their eyes already. The short answer is no, he didn't. But judging by all the stuff that pops up when you Google this, many people buy into it, as you say, Adam.
Yeah.
Imagine what a turn of events that credible pollsters missed that a French 16th century so-called prophet predicted Trump would win the election and become president. The theory is linked to a passage from Les Prophéties, which reads like a long horoscope. Here's an excerpt translated to English. The great, shameless, audacious baller, he will be elected governor of the army. The boldness of his contention, the bridge broken, the city faint from fear.
Did they refer to him as a baller?
Baller!
BAWLER, not like a baller. Yeah.
There's nothing even remotely specific about that. It could apply to so many people. It's just
exactly.
It's just
yeah.
It's just yeah.
Another passage reads, the false trumpet concealing madness will cause Byzantium to change its laws. From Egypt there will go forth a man who wants the edict withdrawn, changing money and standards. So conspiracy theorists believe this passage actually applies to current-day U.S. due to Trump's public views on immigration and the recent wave of refugees coming through Greece.
There will be a guy. He will do some stuff.
Not only do conspiracy theorists believe Michel de Nostradam's writings warned us about Trump hundreds of years ago, but also that his presidency would usher in World War III, and there's a whole bunch of stuff around that too. As James Randi says, Nostradamus himself confessed that the vague manner in which he wrote his prophecies was so that they could not possibly be understood until they were interpreted after the day and by it. Add to that, his stuff is a challenge to translate. Nostradamus wrote in poetic prose, using a mixture of early modern French, which I read is likened to Shakespearean English, so there you go, and archaic words derived from Latin and Greek. So, as you guys say, anyone can interpret this paragraph to fit into their narrative or belief system. Well, for those of you who wonder why so many people buy into these interpretations, here's a little side note. There's actually a name for this. It's called the Forer effect, after psychological Bertram Forer, aka the Barnum effect. It's the observation that individuals will believe statements are specifically true to them personally, even though the statements are vague enough to apply to a wide range of people. For instance, the statement, "You have a tendency to be critical of yourself." So horoscopes are a prime example. Mm-hmm. So there you have it, checkers. As writer Danielle McGuire says on Aussie-based website 9.com, you can now sleep soundly knowing Trump only might start a world war.
Yikes. To be fair, anyone elected might start a world war
True
as the U.S. president. Thanks, Christina, and thanks for joining us once again. Until next time, think better to act better.
Pieces out for Haramboids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Good night, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
We got skepticism. We got the best skepticism. We have skepticism like you wouldn't believe. Believe me.
Wow. I wouldn't want to be the guy editing this one.
Yeah,
It's
sorry,
gonna be a tough
Pat.
one.
Sorry, future Pat and present Pat.